Good morning. All right, let me make sure I'm recording. Okay, yeah, I'm recording. Hi, good morning. Last night I recorded part of the lecture for biomechanics of work. This morning I was really just waiting on Enzo to send me a copy of the key. I wanted to make sure that what he graded upon is correct. So this morning I wanted to record another section with regards to the midterm, as well as a few administrative items. So the beginning of the lecture, I hope everybody is adjusting well. I think it's well over 4 or 5 days into our social distancing and social isolation. I'm certainly practicing that. All of my family members are grounded. And as you can see that I switched gear on you, I went to my son's room because obviously everybody is entertaining during the daytime. And so I kind of hid away so that everybody can hear me. Otherwise, at nighttime, if I record, I try to use the kitchen because that's my usual spot of working. I usually work on the breakfast table in the kitchen. So has all my stuff like chargers and stuff. So if I do another recording sometime in the nighttime, then I'll go back in the kitchen. Anyway, so just some feedback. Originally, if you recall in the announcement that I sent you, I originally planned on doing online sessions during the regular lecture time, and I wanted all of you guys to test your cameras to make sure that you can turn on your camera as you're listening to my lecture to mimic the real lecture as much as possible. Some of my colleagues, not necessarily just ones from the department, but ones I know from the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, some of the academics I know, they are suggesting more flexibility. So in terms of flexibility, they suggested that everybody's going through a stressful time. It's not just a one person or a few people. It's including the instructor, the TA, and everybody in the class. All of the students in the class obviously is going through a series of unwanted and unexpected changes. And I fully express sympathy towards that. I'm fully experiencing that. As I've mentioned, my children are out of daycare as part of their social isolating measures, that they're staying home. My father-in-law came to our house to help all the way from Alabama. So it's a lot of changes for our family as well. So I bet for yours in different ways probably, but unexpected and unwanted, we're all the same. So Enzo and I have been in good communication. So before he sent out the poll, I actually asked the 3 questions to him, and I asked him which one would he prefer. He told me that he honestly does not know. And I told him that I honestly don't know. So I wanted the best result for everybody. So I just thought that it would be a good idea to ask you, who's going to be the person that's receiving my lecture, what's the best way that you would like to to be delivered. So according to your own responses, we got feedback from 10 students. That's more than 50% of the students. I wish there was more responses over the weekend, but I also understand that we sent it out over the weekend. Not everybody checked their email. But so far, based on what we have seen, the red columns are just a reflection of what we're going to see here, the counts. So it looks like out of the 10 responses that we've seen, 5 of them supported, or 50% supported pre-recorded lectures, which I'm doing right now, instead of in real time, everybody turn on their camera, doing like a spontaneous discussion style, like what we're doing in real person lectures. So I think this also enables me to trial and error with my recording, so there's no fumbling during the lecture, like I can't find a button, although that hadn't happened to me. I think the Zoom lecturing online has been pretty smooth. If you have trouble viewing it on Panopto or just have any trouble seeing me or hearing me, let me know. Might be something wrong either with the uploading or with my recording, but I always listen back to my recording right after I recorded it and before I upload it. I make sure everything seems to be good to go, and then I upload it. And then also there's a person, Janice Kinzer at NGNet, who usually you see Allison sitting in our class helping me clip on the mic and making sure the recording is going. So she works for Janice Kinzer from NGNet. She's the person managing all of the online students' recordings and now everybody's recordings. So if you have questions, definitely let me know and I'll relay it to Janice, who can probably help all of us. So coming back to the poll, I think most people wanted to see the pre-recorded lectures. Maybe the third option wasn't framed as much as I meant it to. So what I meant is chunking the videos, regular, duration videos, which would be about an hour, 25 minutes, which is really a long video to watch. And you probably want to take breaks. If you're at home, you probably want to take breaks in between anyway. And for me, on my perspective, when I record, sometimes I would include a reading assignment for you to do or a video that I meant for you to watch as you go. I don't think it's much meaningful for me to play the video inside of the video that I'm recording. So I would much rather stop right there and have you watch the video and then come back to go on to the next section. So that's probably where I will break. Even though only 3 people voted for the third option, I probably will still do it. And I just did this right now. So I'm doing a chunk of video, which I'm recording right now, on your midterm and administrative items, including, where are we going in terms of our online instructing, and what are our plans for the rest of the semester. So this cluster of administrative items I'm grouping in this video. And you can probably see that SSIE 533 lecture 15_2. That's part 2 of this lecture. That's chunked in a different video. It's a long video. It's probably 45 minutes long. It talks about the technicalities of biomechanics at work. So if you feel strongly that this is not going to work, and one of these options work much better for you, let me know. Let me and Enzo know, so that we can adjust as we go as much as we can. So please understand that saying that, oh, I want to meet you in person, is you're probably not going to ask that, but that's not going to happen. But things that we can do online, for example, you say that, well, I would request a different hour of office hour, that can totally happen. So let us know if you have difficulties. Also in the announcement, I wanted to make sure that everybody has access to a device. Don't shy away from telling us that you can't watch the video because you don't have a device. We may be able to help. I am actually really in good communication with our department. All of my colleagues are really supportive, as well as the department chair and the dean. The dean obviously directly works with the vice provost and provost and the president. They are well aware of everybody's difficulties, including the faculty members, the staff, and the students. Most importantly, the students. They are aware that some of the students are having difficulties adjusting to go online, and they're very sympathetic and trying as hard as they can to help. But on your part, if you experience difficulties but we don't know, we really can't help. If you would like to communicate with me something that I can't really personally help you for this class, I can definitely relay it to the upper management, and they are willing and should be able to help you. So enough of that. So from now on, we're going to, unless I hear really different voices from more people that's tipping this vote, I'm probably going to adopt this type of lecturing. So pre-recorded, sharing the screen, uploading onto Panopto. Janice from NGNet shares with everybody in the class. So let's move on and talk about the midterm. I think about half of 50% of the class took the midterm. Everybody did relatively well. Nobody failed, and I'm trying to be transparent here regarding the scores. So your scores reflected in your 100% total score at the end of the semester. This weighs 25% for the project, for the exam track team. But just for easy discussion, you know, we still talk about it on a 100% scale. So easy to see that one person, two people had C's, three people had B's and really high B's, and then 3 of the class had A's, ranging from low A to a high A. So I think maybe the median somewhere in between, like a B. So I think it's a normal, kind of normal distribution, although it doesn't look like a bell curve per se. I'm glad to see that nobody failed. The tail is more heavy on the A side. The other thing is that we don't have a large sample, right? Like we don't have 100 people taking this test. We only have about 10 people taking the test. So let's, as I promised during our last in-person lecture, I will talk about the exam. I didn't feel comfortable projecting the exam on the screen, just for fairness. Some of the students took the test in person, some of the students didn't take the test in person, are anticipating some of the contents to go in the final. So I'll just talk about it verbally. Here's a breakdown of how overall the test takers have done in terms of each questions. So Enzo really helped making all of these charts. So kudos to him, credits go to him. So obviously everybody did really well in the first question, but I'll still say it, you know, the 3 human factor systems goals are system safety, productivity, and worker satisfaction, right? We repeated this probably 2 or 3 times over the first half of the semester. We'll probably continue to go back in the second half of the semester, because this is a take-home message from this class. It's an important concept to carry hopefully through the rest of your career. The second question, okay, so the first section is fill in the blanks, and we talked about the first question. The second one is also a take-home message. So in the first half of the semester, we talked a lot about human-centered design. We spent 3 lectures talking about human factors related research methods. And this is discussed in one of the lectures. So in a human-centered design, evaluation is both the last step in assessing a design and a first step in the next iteration of the design, where it provides a deeper understanding of what people need and what people want. So, and remember the snail loop? I call it a snail loop because it looks like a snail's shell to me. So it goes from the circle, goes from the inner circle, very small rapid rounds, to larger and bigger rounds. And that symbolizes a loop, infinite and iterative loop of create, evaluate, understand. Or you can go from understand, create, evaluate. So it just goes infinitely larger and longer. Starting from ideation is a very small loop, very rapid rounds, just through discussions, experts sitting in a round table and discuss, oh, I think this is a good idea. And the expert B says, well, you know, have you thought of this? So the ideas quickly gets bounced around and changed and solidified as they grow into a prototype. In prototype, it's kind of tested with users or human subjects in some scale. It's not so much of a quick bouncing around of the concepts anymore. It's actually the product made into a prototype, and users use it, give feedback, go through the evaluation loop one more time. So the turnaround is a little bit slower until towards the outer side of the ring, the product actually gets pushed out into the market. Thousands and thousands of users, if this is a popular product, get to use the product, evaluate it, give feedback, and then it's the next round of design. So as I said, this evaluation process is endless. So therefore, it's the last step in assessment and first step in the next iteration. So that concludes the first section, fill in the blanks. The second section is multiple choices. Let's see, some points were lost in here, and I'll try to focus on the ones that most points were missed. So let's look at the second question. It's about visual acuity. So we give a few options for you to pick from to see which one is actually a measurement tool. So I remember during the lecture, I talked about not only Landholt-C rings, right, but I also talked about the Snellen's test, and I also talked about how the Snellen's test, original Snellen's test, can be somewhat biased because the letters are not exactly of the same size. And I also told you from my Chinese heritage, growing up, I used a modified version of the Snellen's test where it's just the letter E that's pointing at different directions, right? So both the Landholt-C rings and Snellen's test are ways of measurement of visual acuity. And branching off of the Snellen's test, I also talked about typography, right? So we talked about how the Snellen's test isn't kind of arbitrarily designed. The letters weren't just grabbed off of a newspaper, but it was actually designed in a very purposeful way to be displayed on a very standardized test as Snellen's test. So we didn't test typography in this test, but it's something that you really should know. Let's see, people did okay on not many points were lost. Regarding Miller's law, we talked about a specific psychology paper that defined Miller's law. We also talked about the magic number 7, right? This tests exactly that. Question 4, people did pretty well. Only one person lost 3 points on this. What's the most powerful principle to consider when coding controls? Remember I talked about when you come into my car, not me come into my car, but you come into my car blindfolded, you can probably still quickly find the ignition. That's the power of location coding. Okay, so 3 people missed question 5 with regards to the Scrum approach. So this is mentioned in one of the Human Factors and Ergonomics Research Methods lectures. Scrum approach is discussed along the way with the V process, as well as the plan, do, check, act, PDCA approach. And then the last one is discussed as the Scrum approach. So the V process, think of an example of designing an airplane. It's a complicated and the consequence of making human errors is expensive. So the V process is a comprehensive way of evaluating, which is in Scrum. And then the PDCA, plan, do, check, act process is somewhere in between. It's the most popular way of just a regular product goes through that process. Scrum process, the example I used in class was designing a software or device that uses software that requires a quick process of turnaround. So yeah, so that's what question 5 is testing about. let's see, question 6. Only one person missed. Okay, so this is about the sample size. Obviously, the exam track people didn't, probably at the point, didn't really get to analyze their data yet, but a sample size should be determined before you analyze your data and even collect your data. So you should have already gone through determining a sample size. Plus, I talked about it in class, and I suggested that there's 3 ways to decide your sample size. One is to run a power study, look at a power curve. Number 2 is look at past literature, whether there is one or several studies that's similar to yours that you plan to conduct, and how many subjects, how many subjects did they use? What is the sample size they used, right? The number 3 is, let's see, if you couldn't, for some reason, determine your sample size through a power curve because you can't determine an effect size because there is not enough information from the past that's available in the literature, and you couldn't find similar studies in the past that's applicable to your situation, or you could find literature in the past that's similar to your situation, and there you can't afford the sample size they used. If they used 10 subjects per group and they have 3 groups, you have 3 groups, but your budget only allows 6 subjects per group. You may just have to do what you have to do, but that's because of budget limitations. So this question tests about sample size determination. Hopefully that helped. Let's see, 3 students missed number 7, and let's see, wanted to show you, is it this? Nope. Okay, so I showed you, this is exactly from the NASA biomechanics page. So it's from here, so anthropometry and biomechanics, as you can see from NASA. I pulled that up in lecture, and what I did is just that I hid the labels. The reason why I wanted to test you this is important, and you will see the importance of this as we go through biomechanics at work. When you refer to part of the human body, which happens a lot and very often in biomechanics and anthropometry, simply pointing at your own body doesn't serve the purpose most of the time, especially when reflecting part of the body in writing. You definitely want some standardized scientific terms, which are shown here. It's used so much, very often in literature when talking about anthropometry and biomechanics, so I do want you to memorize those. So to help you memorize, though, I can explain it again and in greater detail, so hopefully this will help you memorize it. So the center of your body, from here down, this is the medial axis of your body. Anywhere that's diverging from the center of your body, like on the side, this is lateral. So when referring towards the center of your body, that's the medial side. Towards the anterior side of your body, that's the lateral side. So as you can see here. And this medial and lateral axis is along the coronal plane, or maybe you say coronal plane, but I say coronal plane. That's the YZ plane. And then the ventral and dorsal, I memorize it this way. Dorsal means the back. If you look at the root of the word, dorsal actually means the back. Ventral, you can think about ventilation. Your lungs ventilate and helps you ventilate. That goes through your nose and mouth as well. So this side is ventral and the back side is dorsal. This is, for me, this is easier to memorize, and this is along the sagittal plane as if you're going this way. Sagittal. And then cranial, there's a bone that used the word root cranium, and we'll talk about in biomechanics, but just remember cranial, which is part of the test in question 7, is towards the top of like this direction, towards your head, and then caudal is towards the foot. And this plane that's as if it's segmenting you in half, a cross section, that's the transverse plane. So this is an important figure that I would like you to remember how the human body can be referred to. Okay, so that's question 7. Let's see. Okay, so that covers all of the multiple choices. Then we move on to section 3. Okay, so we didn't do too well in question 1 or question 2, so we'll talk about it. So true or false, I thought it was a good idea for you to remember distinctions of several keywords that are kind of similar. So the two in the first half of the semester is lumination and illumination. I gave you a trick when I was teaching lumination and illumination, how to separate them. So illumination has I first, it's illumination itself. So meaning that the light is coming off of itself. So you remember it this way, so it's a source of light. Luminance is something that the light has bounced off of, meaning a reflection. So that's luminance. I think the lecture right before the midterm examination review, we talked about human automation interactions, 15 principles. And 2 of the last principles we talked about had the keywords adaptive and adaptable. Adaptable automation is actually the previous level of adaptive automation. So adaptable meaning that it's something that's able to adapt if it's needed to or if it must. Adaptive meaning that it's automatic. If it sees fit to adapt, it will adapt. It doesn't need a person or a trigger to tell it to adapt. It just knows how to adapt. So therefore, adaptive automation is the next step of adaptable automation. It's more automated than adaptable. Okay, so then we move on to the short answers. Let's see how people did in the short answers. Okay, pretty well. We'll talk about question number 4 first, because obviously I think most people missed points in there. Let's see. The 4th question asks about A/B testing, and to make it more intuitive to answer, I broke this big question down to 6 little parts. So what is A/B testing, right? A/B testing is part of in-service evaluation, and we talked about how some evaluation cannot be done during prototype phase because it's already out on the market. Therefore, it can't be planned and controlled as some of the other experiments. For example, a website has already been used by thousands of users, or a email account has already been used and on the market for a while. Now a new version of it needs to be pushed out, and people wanted to test whether it's a true improvement. Because otherwise, if the current one is good enough, there's no need to push out a new one, right? So A/B testing is an in-service evaluation as part of a descriptive evaluation. What type of application does it most commonly evaluate? Mostly it's in-service websites or software products. How does it differ from a typical usability test? So aside from its in-service properties, it also involves many more users than a typical usability test. So as we say that in a typical usability test, about 3 to 5 or 5 or 6 users is enough. And a usual controlled test that's different from a usability test is probably 20 to 30 subjects. But for an A/B test, you can have somewhere up to hundreds and thousands of users testing your applications. So how is it, okay, well, we talked about how is it different from a typical controlled experiment, right? Like number of users is different. Can you recall a famous example of A/B testing? That's part of the required reading. I also talked about it in detail in class. So we gave the example of Google's more than 40 shades of blue. I forgot whether it's 42 or 46, but there's more than 40 shades of blue, and Google couldn't decide which shade to use. So it actually implemented different shades of blue with different groups of users. Because Google is such a big company, it has thousands and millions of users, it was able to afford, distributing a certain blue to hundreds and thousands of users and collect feedback. And therefore, they ended up finding the desirable shade of blue, which is used in Google right now, right here. And it saved them millions of revenue right away. So that's A/B testing. Obviously, there are different types of testing that I didn't reflect in this midterm. I picked one of them to show that this is an important concept to grasp. Next time when you study for the final, look for all types of testing and make sure that you do understand them. So I don't really want to spend a lot of time talking about the other questions. Not many points were missed in there. And all of them are either from the textbook or from the slides or the reading. So I want you to spend some time looking by yourself. If you would like to request me talking about them one by one, send me and Enzo an email. If there's enough requests, I'll make a separate video talking about the other short answers. That's no problem at all. But I also don't want to waste everybody's time. I know you have to watch videos for all of your other classes, so I don't want to draw on and on for things that people didn't miss many points for. The last question is a calculation. I gave 2 examples in class. I hand wrote one, and that's regarding the cost-benefit ratio when we talked about case 1 from Martin Heelander's book, when he did the plant walkthrough through a circuit board plant and made some improvements, and at the end there was a cost-benefit ratio calculation. I showed that as an example in class, and then the next lecture, I gave a bonus or extra credit question to the class. So class hand calculated that in class, and then I put it on in the midterm. It's a little disappointing to see that some points were still missed, but I definitely understand that calculating under some time pressure is difficult. And there's some variations that I changed a little bit about the parameter of this case, so we can go through it in relative detail. So it says a plan has several operators, and it tells you each product makes how much profit, and it tells you the cost already. It didn't require much calculation of the cost at all. Let's see. I think maybe a tricky part is calculating the total benefit of the change, the improvement. So it says it's maybe what students didn't get correct could be on the number of days, the number of hours per day times the number of days per week times the number of weeks per year times however many operators are out there times the number of screens that are made per operator per day times the profit that's made off of per screen. And that's the profit, or that's the benefit that's made at the end per year. And you use the cost, which was already giving you $30,000 over this benefit that I've just recited, right? So I'll say it again. So the $2 profit per screen times the number of operators, which is 10 operators, times 8 hours per day, times 5 days per week, times 48 weeks per year. That all together gets you $240,000 of benefit. And then you use that over the cost, which is $30,000 at the end. Your cost and benefit ratio should be $1 of cost, $8 of benefit ratio. When you have this type of cost benefit ratio, meaning that the cost is obviously a lot lower than the benefit, then definitely implement the benefit, implement the redesign. Right, so that's all we ask for. Show the calculation, talk about your reasoning, why you would recommend and not recommend to implement the redesign. So hopefully that's helpful in deciphering the midterm performance. If I thought there are things that I can see improvements with, but overall I think it's a pretty realistic and satisfactory display of scores. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, enjoy the second part of the lecture on biomechanics. In the second part, I talked about joints and bones. In Wednesday's lecture, I may not record it on Wednesday, I may record it on Tuesday or before, and I'll just release it. You can watch it in your own time. Anyway, in the intended Wednesday's lecture, I'll talk about muscles and several important calculations using simple single segment biomechanics model, as well as the Niosh lifting equation. So those two calculations are important, and they'll most definitely show up in the test. If we do I'll have to figure it out. If we can do an in-class test, then we'll do that. If we can't, I'm discussing with my colleagues how to deliver tests online, and I'll definitely let you know. But either way, the calculations are important to know, because essentially a biomechanics model is a mathematical model. You can't get away with some calculations, right? All right, I'll stop right here. Be in good communications with me and Enzo, please, and I'll see you next time.